DC politicians want to enact harmful credit card mandates that could take away your cash back and rewards points. Perks that stretch your budget and make life a little easier. Losing these benefits means less money for your family's everyday essentials like gas and groceries. The perks you rely on could disappear, leaving you with higher costs and fewer options. Tell Congress to guard your card and oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card mandates.
Paid for by Electronic Payments Coalition.
Hey, legends. Welcome to season 3 of the Laptop Lifestyle Dad Show. We're switching up the gears here. This is the Hero Maker season. This season is all about leadership. But we're not done with the learning the tools. Sure, we're going to cover AI, social selling, content, attraction marketing, all the other gear that we've been covering up until this point. But I feel it's time to go deeper. Everything that we talk about, it really comes down to leadership. As John Maxwell calls, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So we're going to really unpack and explore what it means to lead from identity, to build not just businesses, but movements, to find the voice inside you, to raise up other leaders. See, hero makers aren't born in the spotlight. They're forged in the trenches of sacrifice, consistency, courage, love. And they make leaders who make other leaders. They pass the mic. They focus on building legacy. So if you're ready to step up, to rise beyond the hustle, beyond the noise, beyond just making profit, and build something that endures, well, welcome. You're exactly where you need to be. And today's guest is no other than Jim Burgoon. Burgoon. There you go. I already dyslexic. Sorry, Jim Burgoon. And we're going to have an amazing conversation here, all around focused on the core topic of leadership. But let's get into it, Jim. So you're a global speaker, you're a leadership coach, you're a visionary who's helped Christ-centered entrepreneurs especially take God's place in front and center for their lives to let it break out into the world. With over 20 years of leadership experience, mastery in relationship leadership, DISC, personality profiling, you really do lead with a heart for faith and influence. Jim, you someone that I can see is a hero maker who becomes a leader who creates other leaders because you're teaching people how to lead themselves and how to go do that in the world. So let's welcome Jim to the show. Can't really wait to unpack your story. So let's start there. I find the best place to start is to give people space to share their story. So Jim, what's your story?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to this and have been looking forward to this, my friend. So, when you say what's your story, there are layers to that. I mean, layers upon layers and layers of my story. But what I will say, like if I'm going to go anywhere, when you talk about the brand of hero makers, heroes, I love what you said. Heroes are made in the trenches.
Mm,
And my story has been one where I have never left the trenches. Whether it be leading at home, leading whether I was at churches or my business or wherever I was leading, school system was always a trench anchored life, basically.
yeah.
So it's been this one time, and I joke about this. Ever since I was a kid, I've had one war after another. Then I joined the military and things like that. So there has always been some form of hardship or some form of challenges that have forged the way I think, the way I move, the way I breathe. But it all
Mm,
comes from the place of the trenches. And I know as we get into this, we'll unpack a lot of that. But what I will say is there has been a lot of things in my life. Growing up, there was abuse. When I was in the military, there was bullying. My wife is diagnosed with multiple mental illness. I myself has complex CPTSD as well as high functioning depression and some chronic illness like autoimmune and stuff. So there's always been this level of fire that was always trying to burn me. And when we get into this, we are always made, none of us who you would consider a hero ever consider ourselves heroes. And I
no, not at
don't.
all.
And I don't consider myself a hero at all. I consider myself somebody who has survived the fire and is trying to bring as many people with me as I can.
I love that. I love that you identify that, hero makers don't necessarily identify themselves as heroes, right? Because it's a whole different conversation. And the conversation I see around this whole topic, and I've seen it, many times, and it's just been highlighted again, is it's not about us, it's about who we can help. It's about the bigger mission, it's about the wider impact. But in saying that, we've had to go through our trials by fire. We've had to go through, you know, climbing our own mountains, if you will, to be able to guide other people, to be able to be that hero maker. So, every hero maker's journey does have its own hero's journey, in that space, but it doesn't stop there. It's only the starting point, if you will. So I like to dig into that a little bit if we can. You know, where did you know? I suppose what's the biggest lessons that you've learnt along your journey to get to where you are now? Like looking at this vantage point, reflecting back on where you've come from to where you are. What would you have wanted someone to say to you before you started? What was some of the wisdom you'd like to be imparted on you as you start to dig into this journey?
So if I was looking back on young Jim, one of the biggest things I think I would say to myself is, listen, there's going to be a lot of hardship, and
Mm,
giving up is easy. Matter of fact, nobody would blame you for giving up. Nobody would blame you for laying down. Nobody would blame you for just trying to just survive. Nobody would blame you. But if you gave up and you laid down and you didn't at least attempt what you saw, what you felt, what vision you were given, then you'll never know what you're truly capable of. You'll
wow.
never know how far you could have gone. Where it's easier to take the easy way out and lay down and just say, "You know what? I'm just going to do my thing, do my job, do whatever I need to do." But it takes grit, it takes resilience, it takes a depth of integrity and character. And if you're constantly building those things, then giving up is not an option, because you
Mm,
start to see that what you're going through has purpose, has platform, and is able to impact greater amounts of people because of the story that's being created.
yeah, well, that's powerful. They say that, most people that they've interviewed on their deathbed, that the number one thing that really scares them, or, when they look back at their life, that is regret. Is that thing that I wish I'd done that thing. I wish I'd stepped up. I wish I rose to that call. Too many of us in life live in get to the end of it, or get to the tombstone in regret.
Yeah.
And I know that you're one of the same people. We're cut from the same cloth in this way. I want to be running and screaming all the way, sliding in, having fun, playing life full out, and
Right.
saying I used every ounce of energy that I could to make an impact. And I think that's the key difference here between like really true leadership. I'm not talking about positional leadership. I'm talking about leaders who are not doing it for themselves, but they're doing it for others to help empower and equip, and that I see in you conversation to lift up others, to raise up
Right.
the bar. That type of leadership.
Right. No, I'm 100% agreement with you, and I think so. And I think if I was going to say it, it would be this: it's that the greatest leaders remember what it felt like.
Mm,
And it's exactly what you're saying. And because we remember what it felt like, we want to help others not have to experience that as well.
yeah,
And I
well
think
said.
that's really where it comes back around, because I think there's too many people who have done this leadership thing, who has done this business thing, who has done all of this stuff for so long. Even as a Christianity, like when you've been a Christian for so long, most people don't even remember that moment
Mm,
that it all changed. And as long as we can stay anchored to what it felt like, what that moment meant, I think we never lose perspective of when somebody else comes up to us, regardless if they have money to pay us or if they're not part of our mission or they're not part of our organization. You generally want to help because you remember what it was like.
yeah, well said. And I just love how this whole conversation's lining up. It's just divine intervention. Like I'm not sure you're aware. I actually just come off being interviewed by Joe Graham. Like he was interviewing me for the Joe
Love
Graham
Joe.
show.
Joe's one of my favorite
I love
people.
Joe. Right. So this is coming off the back of that conversation, and it's just beautiful timing.
I haven't heard. I don't
Uh,
think he's going to release that for a few weeks.
no, it's getting released next week.
Oh,
So,
sweet.
but just coming off the back of that, it's beautiful timing. And I'll have to make sure that we release this one close enough to that so people can tie it in. But the thing I want to really highlight here from that conversation, even to this one, and it's a thread, right, for every conversation, is that this type of leadership, what we're talking about, really is discipleship, and it's designed to go create other leaders who create other leaders. Like it forces an ownership, it forces accountability, it forces a responsibility, if you will, to help us to step up and get up out of our own ego, our own pride, our own arrogance in that space to go play a bigger, better game. Because how can I lead you or be led by others if it's just about their agenda?
Yeah, you know, with the whole agenda thing, interesting enough, Henry Blackaby from, I think the book was Spiritual Leadership, talks about that.
Mm.
And he says, and I hope I don't butcher this quote, but he says, one of the things about being a spiritual leader is helping people get off of their agenda and onto God's agenda.
Yeah, amen.
And so I think there's a big thing about that. Like, everybody out there has an agenda. We all do.
Yeah,
Like, we
of
all
course
do.
we do.
And the reality of a leader is, can we unify agendas to where we're going in the same direction? And the
One
reality
heart,
of
one mind.
one heart, one mind, one direction. And the reality of a spiritual leader comes into the fuller dynamic of that is that one heart, one mind, one direction, also the direction that God's calling us to.
Yeah, right. And I get that. But here's the other side of this conversation, and I want to dig into with you. And I think you've got a depth of wisdom to share in here and perspective. So, as a spiritual leader or a leader of any kind, really, we get into it, we climb the ranks, we set out with really good intentions, we set out with really good mission, but then I don't know, corruption sets in, sin sets in for whatever reason. I'm not making any judgment or condemnation here or any equation, but there seems to be that there are a lot of leaders who raise the ranks but fall off the perch, so to speak.
Yes.
And the challenge that I see here is what happens is the world starts to seep in with individualism, consumerism, idolatry, and I feel like this is the enemy to this whole conversation. Every
Okay.
good story has a hero and every good story has a villain. So we're talking about the villain of this conversation. I love to really deep dive into this with you because I know that you've got a depth of wisdom and from your own personal experiences and your own personal reflection. So let's go. Let's go into it. So what are your thoughts in this whole conversation?
So I'll tell you, the first thing is your gift will make room for you. That's what the Bible tells us. It says our gift makes room for us. But here's the challenge with that. Our gift makes room for us and has us stand before kings, but our character is what keeps us there. And if we're not developing a godly character in the midst of open doors from our gifts that our gift is making, we will not stay where we were planted. And so
Mm,
that's the problem. And the other part of that conversation is, it's not that, we get to a certain pinnacle and corruption hits and all this stuff. We've got to remember that a lot of this stuff starts to reveal what's already there. So, like,
yes.
if you really want to know the type of person you are, give them $1 million and they're going to show you exactly who they are. It's not like when they got the million, it made them that way. There's something inside all of us that is hidden, that is dark, that is really eating away at us. And here's the deal. If your gift makes room for you, if your whatever gets you into a place of higher leadership, higher celebrity, higher all these things, and you've never worked on your character, you're not going to stay there long. That's why you have music artists who are now like drug addicts, and you have
Hmm.
pastors of mega churches who are now like fallen because they've slept around or they've done something because they never dealt with the character before the Lord, growing in that. And so when they got to that, it was just too much for them to handle, and it fell off. The other thing I'll tell you, and this is something that really hit me a long time ago, is I was praying about this because you see these big leaders, and I've been on fairly large stages and speaking and different things. The applause is addicting.
Yeah, I get it.
It's
I've been
super
there.
addicting. It feels
Hmm.
good. Your flesh is like, yeah, this is great. But here's the challenge. You and I were never created to be worshiped like that. And so when we begin to take that on ourselves, that massive applause, that massive thing, and we say, "Yes, thank you for my job, thank you for what I've done." When we begin to receive that instead of redirecting that to the Lord, the problem is that it starts to get into us, and now we think we're the big deal, and that we don't need God, and we don't need to get up in here. And this is where the problem starts coming in, because we're in places we were never meant to receive, or we're in places receiving things we were never meant to receive.
Yeah. And I know that you've sort of become an integral part of our online church with today's discipleship community, and I love having you there. It's a beautiful wisdom and depth that you bring to the conversation. And you've heard me say it a couple of times that, as leaders, we need to be working out ways to be bridges to the conversation, not blocks to the conversation. So, what are some of the things that you do, put in practice, some of the principles, some of the tools, the strategies that help you to facilitate that, where you become the bridge to the conversation, not the block?
So number one is I have to be really aware. So I
Mhm.
think the problem, I think a lot of us is we're aware of what everybody else is doing, but we're very not self-aware at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the greater my self-awareness, the greater I can enter conversations at more authentically, at a higher level. You say like wisdom. So let's even unpack that. And this is what
Yeah.
I do. I do this regularly. Just because you went through something doesn't mean you gain wisdom. Wisdom is not gained through experience. I know it's been said that a long time. It's not. Where
Mm.
wisdom is gained is through evaluated experience. When I
Mhm.
go back into it and I start to rip apart in my mind and my heart, okay, what is this? How did I act here? How should I have acted? What does the Bible say? What is common, like, just everyday, like, nice things that I outside the cultural norms, like just different things. And so if I'm not constantly evaluating situations, then I'm not gaining the wisdom that I need. When you go through something, you may learn something, but if you want applied wisdom, godly wisdom, then you've got to look at that thing and just rip it apart. How was my heart? Did I have an agenda? What could I have said better? How can I improve? That's where
Yeah.
true wisdom is gained. So I think and this is where it comes back to number one. You need self-awareness. If you're not
Mm.
aware of yourself, then when you evaluate it, you will always be the hero or the victim, but you will never actually see yourself for who you really are. And who we really are tends to be flawed. We make mistakes. We fall short. And that's okay. And this is where the insecurity and the self-worth has to come up, because we have to realize that I am not the culmination of my mistakes. That is not my identity. I don't identify as a failure. I am someone who fails. I have failed at more business and more life than I know what to do with, but I don't
Yep.
identify myself as I am not a failure. There's a big difference. So if you have a low self-worth, if you have a low sense of security, if you have no identity, which I'm going to tell you, most people nowadays have lack of identity. It's just
Yeah, so
Swiss
there's
cheese.
character deficiency for sure.
Right. And so because of that, you're going to have a really wonky self-awareness. Like, you're not
Mm.
going to be able to see yourself in a proper perspective, which then when you go in to evaluate your experiences, you're going to already have a deficiency or an anchor or a blockage or a barrier to seeing the truth. And if you
Yeah,
can't
fascinating.
see the truth, you're going to miss it, and you're not going to gain what you need to gain in order to move forward.
I love that, evaluated wisdom. And essentially, that's like something you've just given me a terminology and a vocabulary to something that I've already been doing for the last 10 years, which is journaling. And, going back through the day, like I've got journals for the last decade, basically, okay, how did today go? What did I do well? That part of the conversation. But the flip side of the conversation is, where was I challenged? What could I do different? What could I do something better? And it's in that habit, in that spiritual habit, if you will, where growth it's exponential. It's forced intentional growth
Yes.
is the best way to describe it, right? Mm.
Absolutely. And you've got to be willing to ask the hard questions. Like, if you're
Yeah.
afraid of the hard questions, you're not going to challenge growth. I
No,
mean,
not at all.
we heard it. We've heard it 100 times. If you've been in any leadership for any length of time, you don't grow in your comfort zone. You don't.
Mhm.
Listen, I get it. You don't. Growth is stunted in comfort. But
Mm,
I like to really kind of change a little bit of that narrative as opposed to just saying that you're not gonna grow if you're comfortable. You're not gonna grow if you're not intentional. I think that's a
mm.
better way of putting it
I love that.
because most people you gotta be intentional to step out of where your comfort level is.
Yeah.
Because most people are like, "Oh, I just don't wanna be comfortable. Let's do this." No. If we're intentional, if we ask the hard questions and we're willing to receive the hard truth of it, to take a really good look in the mirror and say, "Yeah, that's a character flaw I need to fix."
Mm,
And be okay with that, I promise you within a short amount of time, you will grow more than any hiring any coach, hiring any person out there who's like, "If you hire me in 90 days, I'll make you a different person." The key and the underlining current of all of this is can you look in the mirror and ask the really tough questions and really search the answers and accept the truth of radical acceptance is what they use in psychology. Just take radical acceptance. This is who I am currently, but it's not going to be who I'm always going to be, and then move
mm.
through that.
There's a lot in that. So that's fascinating. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Because what are the elements to growth? Like I could see that it requires a safe space first and foremost. Like, and so you need a space where you have a safety and intimacy of the community that you're growing with.
Right.
So I think that needs to be very foundational in that space because there's too many, let's call them toxic spaces, where
100%.
where growth is sort of in a wrong environment, wrong agenda, wrong. It's almost manipulative. It's palpable what you can see when you look at it from this vantage point.
Yes.
And so I think that's key, right? We need a safe space where we've got clear boundaries where we respect and feel seen and feel valued, and it's the relationship goes both ways. And in that, I think in that safe space, the culture needs to be above the line, meaning that there's no room for blame, excuse, and denial. There's compassion and there's kindness, and that's part of it, yes. But it's about rising the vibration above the line where people take ownership and accountability and responsibility for everything. What do you feel are some of the elements that's required for an individual to grow, but also a like-minded body of a community to grow together?
So I'll tackle the like-minded body of the community to grow together because that'll be the easier one.
Mm,
Because to grow together as a community, you have to be growing as an individual.
yes, of course.
You cannot grow as a community if you're not growing as an individual. So as a leader of a community, the job of the leader is to encourage, to push towards growth of all the individuals. So that way they have individual growth. And as they
Raise the
grow
lead, right?
individually, yeah, as the
Yeah.
leader, that they're causing their people individual growth. And then the collective community has community growth because now
Mm,
we're all coming together and then there's that back and forth, there's that accountability, there's all that stuff. Now we're growing together. But if you don't start individually, you'll never start community. It's just
mm,
not gonna it has to be both end.
powerful.
For individual, I think first and foremost, we need to really define growth because we
Mm,
just use these terminologies. Let's grow. Well, how are you gonna grow?
yeah,
I define like there was a while ago that I kind of wrote out 6 or 7 dimensions of growth. And they're not all the same. Like there's relational growth, mental growth, emotional growth, physical growth,
spiritual
spiritual
growth,
growth,
yes.
relational growth. There's a bunch of different ways to grow. And so when you're just saying growth, well, where are you growing at? Because you're not going to grow at all of these dimensions all at the same time. It's just not possible. You're one person and you can't do all of it all at
I love
once.
that you point that out there. Sorry to cut in, but I love
Yeah,
that you
sure. Go
point
for it.
that out. Actually, Dave Ferguson is a pastor from Chicago, and I've read a few of his books here. And one of the principles that he talks about here is essentially is a lot of people are out here trying to get their external world right. Like to get their finances right, to get their career right, to get their blah blah, like the external world right. But what he describes is in that book is to get that right, we need to focus on our internal world what you just touched on there in the growth areas of spiritual, fitness, physical, emotional, relational, those areas, right? So there's actually, and this is a self-evaluation examination. So if we can go through and once a month at the very least, go through and say, okay, all right. In my spiritual health, how am I going? Am I on a scale of 1 to 10? What do I need to improve on there? Same with the emotional and same with the relational and blah, blah, blah. And that gives you a bit of an idea of how wonky the internal flywheel is to get the gears kicking along, to get the mechanics going along, to get that flywheel cranking along to reflect the external world. And
Absolutely.
I found myself saying quite a lot lately that most of our challenges and problems in life are not external, they're all internal. So if we can focus on the internal, the external will reflect that.
Mhm.
Let's unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things. Number one is no matter if your internal is getting stronger, growing. I often like it to the illustration of a submarine.
Mm,
Why is a submarine able to go to great lengths underwater and not implode? If you think about this, it's because the internal pressure is equalized or to the external pressure. So because
mm,
they're equalized, the submarine doesn't implode. But the
mm.
problem is once the external pressure is greater and it gets internal, it completely implodes.
Yeah,
So if we look at that as in humanity, as long as we're building the internal pressure to be great, to be equal or greater than the external, then no matter what comes against us, we won't fold. But the moment we allow what's outside of us, because we can't stop everything from coming against us, life is going to life. But once the external comes at us and we internalize that, we're already sunk. We're already
yeah,
starting to
wow.
go downhill. We need to start repressurizing the internals.
That's fascinating. The biblical passage that comes out for me as you're describing that, and I'm very badly paraphrasing. I can never remember where they are and the exact words. But the story that comes to mind is building a house on a rock versus sand.
Mhm.
You
Absolutely.
know, building that, and that's what that spiritual context of this conversation helps us to do. And I know it's done. That's what it's really done for my life and others in my circle of influence is that spiritual part. If it's not there, then you're building a house on sand because it's every you know you're flapping the wind, so to speak. But what this does is it gives a firm foundation. Those roots go deep. So, like a big mighty oak tree in the gale force winds, can sway and bend in the wind because it's got deep roots.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fascinating.
And so we had this is goes back to the growth. It goes back to defining where is the place I need to shore up. I was
Mm,
in the military, so I was a Coast Guardsman. So, in the Coast Guard, we're on ships. I was on ship for 2 years. I was stationed on one. So we got to travel all over the world and stuff. And one of the things we had to learn was how to shore. What that
mm.
really means is when there's a hole, how do you patch the hole so the ship doesn't sink? And how do
Yeah.
you do it within a few minutes? Because in the middle of the ocean, you don't
Well,
get
yeah.
an hour.
Life or
And
death. Yeah.
and so we went through all this training. I mean, I remember one time they brought in this unit. It was basically a half tractor trailer back. They cut it open and they put us all in there. They gave us all these wood and all this, different types of material. And they said, you have literally 5 minutes before this thing fills up to shore up everything. And now there were, windows, so we weren't going to drown, but they got the
Yeah.
watch. But they said
Fascinating experiment.
if it reached the window, you're dead. And so and they were like, okay, so what's this is? And they go, okay, blew a whistle, and then, like, 3 different places started shooting water into this thing. So we're in and it was cold water too. So we're in this thing, and we have to grab these materials, we have to do these things, and we've gotta shore this up, right? We gotta
Mm.
make sure we gotta put this together, patch it up as quick and as we could. And here's what I wanna say to that, because there's a big metaphor that I think is gonna help you and your audience. We couldn't go into that had we not had prior training. If we didn't get the basics, the fundamentals, right? I think there's too much people out there who want to learn all these depth and in-depth things and the deeper things. No, the fundamentals, you never leave the fundamentals. So because we learned the fundamentals of how to do certain things, and then once we learned it to a place of expertise, we were allowed to be more creative. So the reality was when we were faced with the situation, we went right into our training. So this is where like your journaling, the evaluated experience, defining growth, and I would add to your growth if you really want to grow intentionality and action. Reading 6 books doesn't cause you to grow. It's what you do with those 6 books allow growth. That's a
Applied
side note.
knowledge, right? Yeah,
Applied knowledge. It's not just knowledge. If you get
mm,
more knowledge, you're like a librarian or a book, but it's applied knowledge. But anyway, this is where rubber meets the road. So all of your stuff in your quiet time, in your growth time, in your journaling time are to really prepare you for when life hits you in the face. What are you going to do?
mm. I love that. And once again, it comes back to that analogy there with the submarine. The internal versus the external pressure. Yeah, fascinating. And in the Hero Makers, in one of the principles that we're doing here in this season, yes, we talk about creating leaders, not just followers, though. So like it's not about getting up there and being the celebrity and having a bunch of people following you and the praise. Like we've already talked about this a little bit, with those accolades. And I get that that's part of the byproduct of it all. But here's the coming back around to keeping the right focus, the right heart of it all is around this hero makers conversation where we're not just focused on being the hero, but actually creating other leaders who create other leaders. So, what are some of the foundational principles someone needs to become? Sorry. So, what are some of the foundational principles that we need to have to become a hero maker? What are some of the traps that you could probably see someone falling into on this conversation?
So the trap, I think, number one is thinking more of yourself than you ought to.
Mm,
And this is where it goes into when if we were walking around and like I'm a hero, I'm a hero, I'm a hero. Eventually, you'll believe your own news, and you'll
tooting your own
fall.
horn.
Toot your own horn, believe your own news, because if you watch the hero's journey on any type of movie, some of your favorite movies, it's when the hero got arrogant when everything fell apart. So this is where it becomes a good summation of my abilities, my, humility and things like that. So to be a hero maker and some of the principles, I would say number 1 is really constantly work on humility. You're never gonna be as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are. It's like somewhere in the
Mm,
middle. Constantly work on that. Number 2 is work on your character. I will hire 100% or work with anybody who has good character even if they're not competent.
yeah,
Matter of fact, I
skill can be
it's
developed.
yeah, like, you can be developed. Matter of fact, which is really funny because I just posted this today. I said my post, I think, on my Facebook page, I said, "Quit saying you're humble if you keep handing leadership roles out to people who have chemistry and charisma and no character." Right? So I think character trumps everything. So if you're not
Yes,
working
100%
actively
agree.
working on your character, you will never be a hero because you will never get out of the pit. Because every time you try to get out, you will fall. So work on humility, character, and then there's the development stage. Don't ever stop being a student. Like, even the master is still a student, and I think that's where we lose it,
Yeah,
is even, like, I was a martial artist for a while, even my sensei when I was learning, he had a sensei. Like, there's always this thing of no ma I'm never gonna reach the pinnacle, but I'm always growing to get there.
yeah. I love that. Even Dr. Joseph McClendon, who's my mentor in that space and, also a client, I'm doing some work for him as well. He's like 76. He just won an award. He didn't even recognize, he didn't even know he won this award for being one of the world's top 10 coaches in the world in the personal development space.
Sweet.
And, one of the things that he says at 76, been doing this for 30, 40 years, is I'm still just a student
Mhm.
of neuropsychology. That's his field, right? So he's still just a student. And I love that. So we're either green and growing or we're ripe and rotten conversation. Then let's put ourselves into spaces wherein we're intentionally green and growing.
That's it.
Mate, one of the things that I reflect on quite deeply is legacy impact. And this conversation right now is part of that legacy piece, right? Legacy is not when we're gone, it's what we do with our time. So, I had an opportunity. And I see it as an opportunity. I had a bit of a heart attack scare about 12 months ago, and I reflected on that. It's like, well, what do I want people to say about me when I'm no longer here? And what's on my tombstone? And I quite put it down to one word. It was hero maker, and that's hence this whole conversation around this.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I don't ever see a space where I ever retire from that conversation. Like this is something I'll do to the day I die. that I'm no longer needed here on planet Earth. So let's talk about legacy a little bit. What does leaving legacy look like for you personally, whether that be legacy in faith, family, or impact? And how can our everyday leaders start building legacy now?
So, legacy is much bigger than my lifetime. Legacy is what I'm doing now that will last generations. And we've got to think generational. Matter of fact, Ecclesiastes, even if you guys are here as hero makers and you don't know, or you don't know the Bible, or you're not a Christian, I do want to mention there are some great principles in there. One of these
Of
principles
course.
is found in Ecclesiastes 3, where it says, eternity was placed in our heart, right? Which means every decision we make, it has an eternal value to it. So therefore, I can understand that the decisions I make today have ripple effects throughout the course of everybody that comes next to me all the way down. And
Hmm.
so with that being said, if I'm going to create a life that has legacy, a life that outlasts me, then I've got to make decisions that are going to really be like, what are the things that I can do that will move on? And so
Hmm.
like writing books. Personally, that's a legacy marker for me. I wanna write books. Um, I wanna matter of fact, I think I've said I wanna write 50 books before I die,
I love
you
that
know
goal.
and so that's a legacy marker. Why? Because the knowledge, even if it's uploaded to AI, it's still my words. The deal is that that will live longer than I will.
Hmm.
It's transferring my beliefs, my habits, my different things, and not even just that, teaching my kids. I'm gonna pass those on to my kids, but I'm teaching my kids how to evaluate those things, how to think for themselves. These are all legacy things. And so when, like you were saying with the heart attack, when faced with your own morality or mortality, it becomes more important because you don't know if that's gonna happen again, if it's gonna be quicker, if do I really
Yeah,
have this much time? So we gotta start asking questions. And when we start asking hard questions, like simply, what do I wanna leave? Because in leadership, there's, I think it was who was it? Elmore, John Elmore, not John Maxwell, it was Elmore. Tim Elmore, who was actually John Maxwell's ghostwriter. So if you read
hmm.
the Maxwell Bible, Tim Elmore actually wrote it off of John's principles. I met Tim,
Mm.
great guy. He
Okay,
wrote
cool.
something called The Habitudes, and he calls it life sentence. He said, and he explains it. He says basically what you said, what your tomb says. He said, when you die, he said, everybody gonna go eat potato salad, because that's what they do at funerals for some reason. But they're gonna say one sentence about you. What sentence is that do you wanna make them say? And this is where we start evaluating what is that one sentence? And in light of that one sentence, what actions do I need to take in order to accomplish that? And when we start really honing in on that, we start jettison things that don't lean into that. All the nonsense that we do, we're gonna be like, "No,
Yeah,
that's gone." And we start really focusing on, does this push me towards that sentence or push me away?
that's fascinating. It's very contradictory to the consumeristic, hedonistic culture that the Western world is very much consumed by. Because it's basically the whole idea of it is to live for now. There is no tomorrow. We might as well have the fun we can have right now. Type sort of and that was my 20s and my early 30s. I did live for the now, and I partied hard, I gambled hard, I did all of that rock star
Mhm.
lifestyle.
Right.
Versus, the conversation here now is it's about something bigger than me, and it's about something bigger than us. It's about legacy. It's about impact. It just shifts the total thinking of it all.
Right, it does.
And the statement that I'm left with here, and it's something that's actually quite, those statements, right? You hear them and you keep repeating them about several times, and say something either for you or for the world, either way. And it's something that Mark Cuban said, and now I'm very badly paraphrasing here, but basically to sum it up was creation is life, consumerism is death. Now, if we're, obviously we can't all be all creation, we can't all be consumerism. There's somewhere in the middle of that conversation. But the point of the matter is, if we're just consuming and that's all we're doing, then we're leading towards a ripe and rotten lifestyle versus being in a space where we're creating, and creating is all about impact and legacy and
Right,
growth,
right.
and that's what's green and growing type sort of conversation, right? So
Yeah.
it's an interesting dichotomy.
It really is, and one thing I would add to that, which is, again, you're right. I love what you're saying. You like green and growing or ripe and rotten. I love that. That's a great analogy. And one thing I would tell you is like the reason why we're so confused, why we can't decide, why we feel stuck is we have too many voices. And consumerism increases voices.
Mm,
Because you may be listening to your influencers on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and podcast and this. And you know what a lot of people aren't doing is they're not running to the Bible to get the only voice that they need. And
yeah,
so we're
the
getting
truth,
all
the
the
water.
truth. Right. And so we're getting
Yeah,
all these voices and we're getting all this stuff. And here's what it does. It creates burnout because now we're overdoing it and we're burnt out. We're completely like ready to give up and we're so
yeah,
confused and we're so stuck. It's because we were created to grow. We were created to be creative. We were created
life.
to pour out. So if you're being poured into all the time, then you're
Mm,
really one of the it's like that old cartoons where, you're like one of those people that keep getting fatter and fatter and fatter until eventually you explode and
yeah.
you leave a mess, nothing of beauty.
I think of it as you're describing it. Our life's very much like this. This
Mhm.
only works if it gets charged up.
Right.
It's got to get plugged into the power source, essentially the source of life. In this case, the Bible and the truth of the Word and God and Jesus. We've got to continue to be plugged into the source to be able to, you know, be nourished, to be fed. But then at that same time, we've got a job to do. Which is to go out into the world to operate out of overflow instead of depletion, and you know, go and create legacy,
Right.
mission focused first instead of transactional conversations.
Absolutely.
Mm. Mate, I'm definitely going to have you back for a part two to this whole conversation. I feel like we're only just getting started.
Right, barely
um,
scratching the surface.
right, but we're running out of time. So, for this episode, what is some last words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience? And we'll definitely have you back for a part two.
Well, I appreciate that. Words of wisdom is don't be overwhelmed by where to start. Start small and grow because
Mm,
diligence is doing little things consistently to create big things. So instead of trying to tackle the big thing, start small, just be intentional, be very evaluatory of it, but start small and take one step at a time. And before you know it, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, how did I get this far? It's because you were diligent, you started small, you didn't hate small beginnings, and
yeah,
eventually you're going to look back and you're going to be like, look how far I've come. Now you've got a long way to go, but look how far I've come. So that would be the wisdom I would leave for people.
absolutely beautiful. Thank you very much for just jumping on and saying yes to imparting some of your wisdom here. You have your own podcast, so I want to give you an opportunity here to share a little bit about that and invite people to come listen to yours. So over to you.
All right. So I appreciate that. So my podcast currently is called Online Business for Christian Creatives. However, probably in the next couple weeks, it is actually shifting names. I'm rebranding it. It is going
I
to be
love that.
called The Unshakable Life.
Mm,
Because as I get deeper and deeper, I have been a career, and this is for you guys who want to listen. I have been a career developer, equipper. Um, I have a life of resilience through all the stuff I've been through, all the stuff my wife has been through. And all I want to do is help people overcome the anchors and the barriers that keep them from doing all that God wants them to. And so to do that, we've got to create an unshakable life. And so the podcast name is moving into Unshakable Life. And you can find that on leadwithjim.com. That's my website, or you can look on it in Apple. It should be changed within the next week. So that's it.
that's absolutely brilliant. We'll make sure all those links in the show notes, and we'll keep it active and updated in that space as well. But one of the things I love about this whole hero makers conversation is we've got to look for ways to collaborate, not compete. So, thank you very much for jumping on and saying yes. Thank you very much for sharing with our audience your podcast, and listeners. Make sure you go and subscribe and tune in, because this is how we can connect with each other and support each other. I don't know everything. Jim doesn't know everything, but together we can go do that life, that journey together, and we can be challenged. We can have that safe space to doubt, to question, to challenge, to evaluate and discern which way we need to go towards working towards the greater good impact here. So thank you very much, Jim. Before we wrap up, always like to sort of close out. This is sort of purely selfish as well as, towards our audience. But I'm always looking to add to my book collection. What's a book that you're currently reading or you recommend everybody should read? I want to stay away from the more popular ones. I want to get into the more, obscure ones. What's a book you recommend?
That's a good question because I'm actually within a few books right now. One of my favorite all-time books. It's a short book. It's a short read. By I think guy's last name is Edwards. It's called Tale of Three Kings.
Okay.
It was one of the most powerful books I ever read. And what it is, it's a story of David, Saul, and I believe it's Absalom.
Yep.
And the reality of it is, he sums it up and says, "Do you want to be a spear chucker, or do you want to be somebody who's encouraging and uplifting?"
I
And
love that.
so he goes through the story of it, and it was when I was a young believer in the faith, and when I was growing up, it was one of the most impactful books I think I ever read at the time. So it is in my top 3, and I highly recommend everybody to read that one. And it's a short book. It's a very short book.
One of the most, I mean, I love that. I'll have to definitely go read that. Another book that recommend whilst I'm here that just comes to the top of my mind is one of my very first ones I got into this space is Jim Rohn, Seasons of Life. No, and I love that this whole conversation that we've done today essentially is looking at life and evaluating it and growing from it and maturing from it. But maturity only happens in participation. And I would actually add to that, maturity only happens in participation to community, to be able to be something bigger than yourself. So Jim, I love the way that you serve and the way that you share your life story through your podcast, through your social. And it's just been an absolute pleasure. As I said, we're only just starting to scratch the surface here. But for our listeners, this podcast has been hosted on Apple. It's been hosted on Spotify and YouTube. And also, thank you very much to our sponsorship and partnership with the Los Angeles Tribune, with the LATPN podcast network. Thank you very much. And you can find us all those places. Make sure you subscribe, share this episode out with your friends and family. But more importantly, let's come back and have a conversation. Let's share with the insights and the wisdom that you've picked up from today's discussion and how you're going to look at applying that to your life. And if you want to connect with either myself or Jim, we'll make sure that the details are in the show notes for you below. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And as always, stay caffeinated, stay legendary, and we'll see you on the next one.
Corporate megastores are spending millions lobbying DC politicians on one-sided policies that send small businesses tumbling. They want to enact harmful credit card mandates that take resources away from your local credit union and community bank, leaving Main Street businesses with less access to credit, making it harder for your family to pay for everyday goods like gas and groceries. Tell Congress to guard your card and oppose the Durbin-Marshall credit card mandates.
Paid for by Electronic Payments Coalition.